Alexey, good to see you. All right, first let's talk
Great to
about
be with
this
you, Michelle.
case of Tatarsky, the Russian blogger. It seems surprising. Somebody like him, who is pro-war in Ukraine, who has some 500,000 supporters online, so something of a public figure, would feel pretty safe holding an event like that in St. Petersburg. Should he not have? Should anybody with those viewpoints not feel safe right now?
Look, I think they should because obviously they've been on the watch list in the first instance by the Ukrainians, who are obviously not crazy about everything he did, from running commentary to the promotion of Russia's invasion to the fundraising to support Russian war efforts. So clearly, the Ukrainians would be cheering for that a particular outcome. But as your earlier report has suggested, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner Group, kind of challenged the developing narrative of the Russian authorities, who are quick to blame the Ukrainians for this particular murder. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if they would classify it as a terrorist attack, similar to the way how they classified the Daria Dugina murder last year. So it would be really interesting to see how it will all turn out. Obviously, Maxim Fomin, that's the real name of the blogger. Tatarsky is his nickname. Probably felt safe in that particular cafe because the cafe was once under Prigozhin's, the founder of the Wagner Group, control, but he handed over, in his own words, to the so-called patriotic movement called Cyberfront Z. So he probably thought it wasn't just a so-called patriotic stronghold, but it was probably a well-guarded place that could only admit it people of certain views. So obviously he was caught completely by surprise when this attack took place.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about the murder of Daria Dugina in August of last year. She was the daughter of this ultra-nationalist, somebody who was sometimes called Putin's brain. But at the time, it was also said that he had actually been critical at times of Russia's actions in Ukraine, not for what they were doing, but for not being tough enough. What about in the case of Tatarsky? Was he also somewhat critical? Could those elements have played into both of these murders?
Well, there is definitely a ground to make such suggestions because it's actually a bit strange, but well, not strange, but it's actually quite interesting. But the majority of so-called ultra-nationalist and patriotic bloggers, military correspondents, at some point in time, they all had a go at the way how the Russian military command and, more importantly, political leadership was managing the operation. So they were not really critical of the Kremlin for launching the war. They were not critical for invading the Ukraine. They were critical for the Kremlin and the Russian military failing to achieve decisive victory, which is a very interesting twist. So in this sense, was he on bad books with the Kremlin? Well, I'm not really sure. I don't think so. What was he on the bad books with Ministry of Defense? Again, I'm not 100% sure because he was certainly given access to highly sensitive areas, including the front line, which wouldn't be the case if somehow the Russian generals felt threatened by whatever he would be able to dig in and find out. In terms of carrying a degree of public clout and prominence and being one of the influencers, without doubt, he was one of them. But what really makes me curious about this particular murder is this orthodox connection with Daria Dugina, because both Dugina and Tatarsky were not just right-wing patriots, but they were also active supporters of the kind of the theological underpinning of Russia's war in Ukraine by being active participants in as Russian Orthodox Christians in the kind of creating the spiritual as well as civilizational narrative to justify Russia's actions in Ukraine. So perhaps the roots of both murders actually lie there.
Very interesting. And Alexey, we've just gotten word that the suspect in the killing of Tatarsky Daria Trepova has just been arrested. She is now in custody. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the battle for Bakhmut, which has been raging on for weeks and weeks. Now the head of the Wagner mercenary group says, all right, we've raised our flag over City Hall. We now have Bakhmut. Well, the Ukrainian army says, not so fast. It's still raging on. Raising your flag doesn't necessarily mean control of the area, does it?
No, it means control over part of the city. Obviously, when you establish control over um, um, the administration building of the town, it carries a degree of symbolism. And I think raising of the flag was more of a symbolic gesture. And as Prigozhin actually explained, he also decided to raise this flag to honor the death of Tatarsky. However, as you have suggested, as well as what the Ukrainians are saying, the Russians don't have full control of Bakhmut. I would estimate that they would probably control close to between 70 to 80% of the city. But as long as the Ukrainians hold on to even 20% of the city or even 10% of the city, that would still be classifying, that would still refer to Bakhmut as a contested area. Besides, the Ukrainians have the opportunity to launch a counteroffensive from nearby areas because they assemble pretty formidable forces in the vicinity of Bakhmut. So, as long as the Russians don't control the whole of Bakhmut, and as long as the Ukrainians have even a nominal presence in the city would still remain a contested battlefield. But only when the Russians would be able not just to secure the entire city, but also adjacent area, establish the protective barrier, and possibly repel any attempts by the Ukrainian forces to launch successful counteroffensive, then they can claim victory in the battle for Bakhmut, which I would actually dramatically say went for months and months, almost like a year-long campaign. So yes, it's not over yet. That's for sure.
All right, Alexey Muraviev, good conversation. Always great to talk to you.
Thank you.